The plan is we're doing a goblet. So I'll show you, grab it, what we're going to turn. Something like this. This is a part finished one. It's still got the base on, which I've yet to part off. Over the years, I've made quite a lot of these, and I make them for use as well as decorative. Some of them are intended just to be decorative. I do one with a natural edge and various other sort of variations on the goblet theme. But this one could be a functional goblet with the right finish on it. I mean, the functional finishes I use are either a melamine lacquer, probably at least 6-8 coats, something like that, or Rustins do a 2-part plastic finish, which they say is impervious to water and everything else once poured. So that's quite a good finish as well. You've got to put on sort of a coat per 24 hours roughly, so the finishing process is going to take you at least a week if you're using that, because again, if you're putting 6 to 8 coats on at one a day, it does take time to actually build up. You can see that one there has got a twist stem on it. I'll also be showing you how to do that, and it's a lot simpler than it looks. So yeah, I'll be going through the whole process of turning one of these and putting the finish on it. So without further ado, we'll get started on that. For this demo, I've got a piece of sycamore here. This is about a 3-inch square, roughly 8.5 inches long, but there aren't any fixed dimensions for goblets. It can be as long as you want, short as you want, width-wise, but I mean, I sort of model this on the standard wine glass, so between 3 and 4 inches is where I start. 3.5 inches would be my ideal size blank, by about 8 inches, and I aim for the stem of the goblet to be that big, because if you're grabbing hold of the goblet by the stem, you want it to be the length of, or the width of your fingers, basically, the width of your hand. So you don't want a excessively tall goblet because it'll be unstable if it's full of liquid, and too short a stem and it just looks a little bit squat and clunky. So I think this sort of blank is probably a good starting point. So I'm just going to switch over to the other camera, so you won't see me, but you will see what's going on the screen. There. Right, so I'll move over to the lathe. See my blank there. As yet, it's as it came off the saw, basically. I'm going to mark the center. The accurate way is to draw lines corner to corner, but with this, you don't need that level of accuracy. So what I do is lock my fingers together, draw a line from each of the 4 sides, and I'll end up with a box in the middle. The center of that box is the center of the blank, or close enough. Automatic center punch here. It's a spring-loaded point. You push it, and you'll hear a click when it fires. So it just puts a little indentation there, which just helps me locate it on the lathe. So exactly the same the other end. This end's got wax on, so the pencil lines won't show up very well. But I can see the marks I'm making, so that's working for me, even if it doesn't show on the camera. Again, little indentation in the middle, so I've got a mark on each end. To mount this on the lathe, I've got on the tailstock end here, you can see I've got a ring center. I prefer ring centers to point centers because A, it's easier to relocate stuff when you take it off the lathe and put it back, and B, having that ring there, it spreads the load and gives you a much more positive hold on the lathe. For the drive end, I've got a standard 2 Morse taper 4-prong drive. That'll go in the headstock. I've set my lathe speed to minimum, which on this is a few RPMs, literally. So to mount my blank, if I was sort of considering which end would be the spigot end, I would put the spigot end at the tailstock end, purely because being right-handed, I think it's easier for me to make a spigot on my right-hand end on the tailstock end rather than the headstock end. So no other reason than that. You can do it either way around, and there's no right or wrong with that. This has actually got some nice figuring in it, so that might show itself when we actually turn this. This has got no particular flaws or features that would lead me to choose one end over the other, so that's fine where it is, I think. I'm just mounting it on the headstock, the drive end. Then I'll push my tailstock in till it's nearly touching. Lock the cam on that so it's locked in place. And just put another light on there. And then I'll drive the quilling on the tailstock to engage the centre in the wood. So that's there. Take the spindle lock off so it'll spin. So part one, blank mounted on the lathe safely, and with enough pressure from the tailstock, that's engaging the teeth on the drive centre. I know a lot of people suggest that you should hammer the drive centre into the end of the blank to save the bearings on the lathe, but to be honest, with a lathe like this, if a little bit of pressure from the tailstock's going to damage the bearings, then there's a problem with the bearing. So I never bother with that. I just wind it in, and that's the job done. I've locked the tailstock so it's not going to unscrew as I turn. Not that it ever would on this lathe, I don't think. And I'm setting my rest so it's about 8-10 millimeters away from the front edge of the wood, and I'm measuring that on the corners because that's obviously the widest point. And I'm also spinning the blank so it's not going to foul on the rest. I'm just making sure I've got it centered and it's not fouling on the rest. And when I spin it, I'm pushing it away from me. There's a good reason for that. If I go the other way and I don't get my thumb out of the way, it hurts. So I always go that way. Right, so that's the blank setup, speed set to minimum, and the rest is the tool rest and the banjo is locked down in place. So in theory, everything's good to go. One thing that's missing is me not putting my goggles on, so I put my goggles on now. I'm using goggles rather than the visor, so it's easier to talk. So that's ready to go. The first thing I do when I turn this on is to get out of the way. So if I have forgotten anything, I'm not in the firing line. So I'll start the lathe up, and as I said, it's running slow. And then with me still standing out of the firing line, I'll bring the speed up. For a 3-inch blank like that, you could probably go up to about 2000 RPM. I'm running that at about 1500, which I think is an adequate speed for that. I'm going to use a spindle roughing gouge here, which is about 1 inch spindle roughing gouge. And I'll start on the wood and cut towards the end, so there's no danger of me splitting off the corners. So I'm using the bevel to control the cut, put the tool on the rest, and then push towards the end. And with each cut, take a slightly bigger cut from the end. So you can see I'm cutting a taper on the blank effectively. And now I'm getting close to the other end. I'll just go the other way. And once I've got rid of the corners, I can go in either direction and continue to rough the blank down. So at that point, I'm checking it for roundness. There's still a bit of a flap on it. And you see when I put my thumb on the blank, I'm doing it in the direction of rotation. So there's no danger of me catching on anything sticking out or sending my thumb back. I'm not fussed if that's not perfectly round. It's pretty close to it. But at this stage, if there's the odd flat on it, it doesn't really matter. Like there's a flat, but at this end's round. The reason I say I'm not fussed at this stage, what I'm going to do is cut a spigot and put that in a chuck. And sometimes, as I'm sure you've found out, you put a piece of wood in the chuck and it's not quite running through. The wood compresses slightly, so even with a perfect set of jaws and a perfect piece of wood and a perfect spigot, it still might not run through because of the way the wood's going to compress. So at the point when I put it in the chuck, I will read through that, and at that stage I'll lose the remaining flat. So that's why I'm not overly concerned now. I'll bring the rest in a little bit, that gap's opened up, and then I can use a simple 1/4 inch or 6mm parting tool to create my spigot. Before I do that, I'll show you the chuck. I've got a 4-inch chuck with a set of gripper jaws in it. I find those very good for spindle work, goblet, things like that. And as you can see there, the jaws are open by about 5-6 millimeters. So I'm setting my dividers or my calipers to that dimension. So my spigot will hopefully form a perfect circle, and I'll get maximum contact between jaws and spigot. Depth-wise, you can see these are quite long jaws. Again, I think that's quite a plus with spindle turning, where you've got things extending from the end of the chuck by quite a distance. So I can make quite a long spigot here. So I'll take 2 or 3 cuts with a parting tool to make that long spigot. And I'm going right on the end of the blank, cut in some way, and I'll use my calipers on the blank while it's running. These are very rounded on the end, so there's no danger of them digging into the wood. I've got one hand on the calipers, one hand on the parting tool, and at that point I know I'm at the right diameter. So there's my sizing mark, so I can take another cut down to the same diameter, and then about another half a width cut. That should be about right. So there's my spigot, just a simple straight parallel sided spigot, and I can bring my chuck in just to check the depth. I'm about 3/4 of the depth of the jaws, so I can take just a little bit more to make a longer spigot. Another couple of millimeters just for extra security. So there's my spigot done. So that's all I need to do between centres. So I can slacken off my quill. I'll remove the live centre. I don't need that anymore. And I'll just knock out that drive centre. So I'm going to put the chuck in place now. I'll screw the chuck onto the lathe. And all I do to make sure that's tight is on the last part of the thread, just give it a bit of a twist and lock it in. And that's good to go now. So I can get my blank mounted in the chuck, just open it slightly, and there we are. When you put your blank in the chuck, try to avoid holding it like this, because you tend to twist it one way or the other. I'll put my finger right on the center of the blank and just push in. And that, even if I'm pushing slightly to one side, it will still center it. So I'm tightening the chuck there. I'll just tighten it on that hole only. There's no need to go around and do the other one. They're all on the same scroll. So on a good quality chuck, that's all you need to do. Okay, so that doesn't look too bad. If I run that, that seems to be running fairly true. But just to be doubly sure, I'll just screw it out with my spindle roughing gauge. And that's probably enough to get rid of the remaining flats. Yeah, so that's now circular. There are no flats left on it. First thing I do with a goblet is the cup. Remember, with a goblet, let me use my model there for reference. You can see there, when you turn the stem, there's not a lot of support for what's at the top of the goblet. So you need to turn your goblet sequentially. Start off at the cup end, work your way back towards the headstock. So you're working your way back and doing it in sections to maximize support as you go. You can't turn the stem first and then turn the cup. You haven't got the support on the goblet. I mean, give you another good example of that. This one here, the stem in the middle there is, I don't know, 4 or 5 millimeters thick. So that will actually bend if I flex it. So there's no way you could turn the cup of that one having turned the stem. So we start off at the top and work down. But that's clear. I'm just going to take the tailstock away to give me more room. Being a short bed lathe, that's probably the limitation of this particular machine, but it's not a problem. Just remove the tailstock, and then I can get out of the way of the camera and you can see better what I'm doing.
Some questions, Paul?
Pardon?
Questions?
Question, yes. Yeah, it's about a 3 to 4 inch diameter, so 75 to 100 mil with your metric, and 7 to 9 inches long. I think it's ideal length is 8-ish inch, 8.5 inches lengthwise, so 200 mil or just over. But there is no fixed rules on this. You can make a goblet any size you like. I've modelled that blank size on a standard wine glass. So if you're trying to make one that's going to hold a glass of wine, that's probably not a bad place to start. So I'm setting my rest up.
Also, what chuck are you using, Paul?
Again, sorry?
What chuck are you using?
That's one of the old Axminster super precision chucks.
That's it.
I still prefer those to the modern ones. So I've stuck with them. But yeah, it's a 4-inch scroll chuck. I'm going to switch to the side camera, that one there. I'm going to try to position the camera so you can see what I'm doing on the end of the goblet. So bear with me, I'll just sort that out. In terms of tools, I've got 1/2-inch spindle gauge here. That's what I'm going to be using to work on the end of this. First thing I need to do is just square that end off. So I'll stand in front of the lathe. I'll set the rest so I'm cutting pretty much on center height. And there's a little bit of wobble on the end there because it's not quite square. So I'm just holding the gauge, flute at 45 degrees and the bevel pointing at 90 degrees to the bed. So I'm cutting straight across. Put the tool in on the end there and push. If you get the angle right, you'll go straight across and take a cut to center and cut the end squared off. So I'll just bring my rest in a little more. Right, I'm just going to move the camera. Okay, so that's what's happening on the end of the blank. I'm standing on the side here. What I need to do now is to put my rest, so I'm cutting exactly on center with the point of the gauge. So I'll just a couple of adjustments here. There we go. The reason I need to get it done accurately because I'm going to use the gauge to drill the blank. I'm also going to drop the speed down here to 600 or 700 RPM. This drilling process creates quite a lot of heat. So I'll put the point of the gauge right on the center of the blank there and then just push it. I can feel that rest is ever so slightly too high, so I'm just going to drop it probably by a millimeter. Get it on center. Push in, and you can see that's drilling. Withdraw the gauge every, let's say, 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Depth-wise, I'd say go in about 3 inches. So clear the shavings and then go again. So you can see where my thumb is. I'm holding my thumb there because I'm thinking that's probably a good sort of depth for the end of the blank. Right, so the hole's gone to the depth I need now. All I need to do now is hollow it. There are a number of ways of doing it, and I'll show you a few different ones here. If I use my gouge with the flute pointing at 60 degrees, let's say for simplicity, I just visualize that pointing at my left shoulder. That's about the right angle. And I hold it in the end of the hole there and just draw it to the left. Put it in the hole and draw it back out and pull to the left. So the left wing is the part that's doing the cutting. So what I should have said here, what I need is a long fingernail grind there. Right. Round bar scraper. I've got a 1/2 round scraper here on a round bar. The round bar isn't essential, but I like these because I can put that at any angle I want on the rest and it's stable. So It's a homemade scraper. It was something else. And again, put that on the rest. I'm cutting just above centre and in the hole and pull towards me. So that's another way of hollowing. I could use any one of a number of scrapers on that. But on my goblets and other open vessels like that, I quite like to use a ring tool, one of these. And you can see that the tip of the tool there, what you've got is effectively a short tube stuck on the end of a rod. One side of the tube has an external bevel, which you can see on the left there, and the other side of the tube here, where my finger is now, has an internal bevel. These are absolutely superb for cutting end grain. So this is what we're dealing with here, end grain. The grain is running parallel to the length of the spindle. So it's typical spindle blank turning end grain on the end here. I like these because they're simple, they're cheap, no fancy guards and things to get in the way. Fairly easy to work with and fairly easy to sharpen. And before you ask how do you sharpen it, I just sharpen it by hand. As you can see, there's not a lot of tool on the end there. So if you sharpen that on a grinder, you probably get through it fairly quickly. But I've had this for quite some time. And I just use a little flat diamond hone on the bevel on the outside. And I do the same on the internal bevel. I just sharpen the outside edge. I do have a little round hone that I can use on the inside, but to be honest, I very rarely use that. So to use this, what I need is enough space between the rest and the wood to withdraw the tool so it comes off the wood before I hit the rest. So that's why I've got a big gap now between the rest and the wood. I need enough room for this tool to work. I'm going to use it on the external bevel side. So the external bevel is on the left side of the tool, or the front side if you're stood in front of the lathe. Again, cut from center to edge because we're cutting end grain here. So center to edge means we're cutting with the grain. So if I start the lathe, I hold this on the rest, put it against the hole, and then just draw it back towards me. And I'm cutting roughly 8 o'clock. A lot of people say to me they have problems with ring tools because they get almighty catches with them. I think the problem with that is if you use this tool like a conventional tool where you're cutting at 9 o'clock on the clock face or 10 o'clock in the position where I'm holding it now, and the cutter is pointing upwards, if you get a catch, what's going to happen is that tool's going to pull itself into the wood and it's being forced down against the rest and it's got nowhere to go, so it's going to pull itself in yet further. The way I like to use it, let me just drop that rest slightly, is between 7 and 8 o'clock, so here. So the tool is now pointing sideways. So if I get a catch, what happens is it does that. It gets pushed away from the wood. The pressure of the cut gets too much for me to hold and it'll just get pushed away. So it's in a way self-limiting if used in that way. So the chances of getting a catch is much reduced. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's much reduced. The catches are a little bit less dramatic and it's a little bit easier to handle. I'll just take the speed of the lathe back up. Tool on the rest, into the wood, and then pull back. I just need to open that hole up a little more. So I'm just going to switch to a spindle gauge and open the hole up. The end of that ring tool is about 3/4 of an inch. So I need to allow enough room for that to get in, and I've drilled effectively a 1/2 inch hole with my 1/2 inch spindle gauge. So I need to go just a little bit wider. Right, so pick up the spindle gauge. This is another cut which I could also show you. It's an upside down cut. Instead of using the gauge with the flute pointing upwards, you point the flute downwards and you cut at the top of the blank. And it's a very quick way of removing a lot of wood. Takes a bit of practice, but one worth doing. So the flute runs almost against the rest, and the bevel is actually contacting the top of the wood. And by me pushing this tool backwards and forwards, I'm controlling the cut. So I get the tool where it's cutting, and I'll swing it through an arc, and I can go into the hole and actually take quite a bit of wood away quite quickly. All I'm trying to do here is open that up to get the ring tool in. So I'm not going to hollow the whole thing this way, but you can see there, if used in the right way, this can be quite a useful cut, and you can vary the amount you're trying to cut. So it's a useful way of hollowing. I think one of Dennis White's videos shows that exact cut. He doesn't talk about it a lot, but he does it, and does it far better than I ever could. Right, so move my camera back. So back to the ring tool. Now I've got a bit more room to work with. I just need to move my rest back again. So create a bit more space, and I'm going to lower the rest a bit as well. I don't want to be working with the handle high up and the cutter low down. So as that hole opens up, I follow it down with the rest. So this is one instance where the rest is and the tool are considerably below center. So on a bigger hole, I'm constantly moving the rest down to follow it. So I put the tool against the hole in the middle at about 7 o'clock. Draw it back towards me. A little bit of chatting. I'll try to work my way around the camera here, so just want to get a position where I'm not obstructing the camera, and you can see some of what's going on. Let me try and move the camera over to the end, and I'll try and do this from the side of the lathe so you get a slightly better view of what I'm doing. That's better. So, tool on the rest, push it into the hole and draw it back. You can see occasionally you get a clump of shavings on the end, but they're very easy to clear. And I'm just using my fingers here to hold the tool down on the rest, put it into the hole and draw it back. When you get right to the bottom of the hole, that bevel on the end has trouble cutting across the bottom of the hole. As it gets deeper and deeper, the handle's obviously coming farther and farther up. So you get to a point where you lose bevel contact. So at that point, you have to switch over to the flat side of the tool. I think I'm just about reaching that point now. So if I turn the tool over, so I'm now using the flat side of the bevel, put it into the hole, a bit of a cut in the middle, and then once I've done that, I can turn back over to the external bevel. Just want to lower the rest just a fraction more. Now I'm getting wider at the end here. I want to keep the rest sort of in line with that. So you can see some of what I'm doing there. I'm just doing a simple progressive curve from the bottom of the cup up the side. So I'm visualizing that shape in my head and trying to create it really without sort of an outside shape to measure it again. So in this instance, I'm doing the inside first. That's chattering a bit on the end there where I'm using the external, the internal bevel end of the tool. So to get to the bottom of the hole, I'll just bring the rest in a little bit higher and try and go in straight. And that's probably that chattering. Okay. So I can go back to the external bevel. I've taken the centre down to the bottom of the hole now. So it goes the other way up. Bring this out. And I can thin the wall at the cup at the top. Work on getting that curve. Be a nice flowing sort of curve. What I like about this tool is it does leave quite a reasonable finish. You get as good a cut off this as you do off a gouge, because really what you're looking at here is a gouge that you turn the handle through 90 degrees. And treat it like that and it works in exactly the same way. So that helps, and certainly helps me visualise how the tool works and how it cuts. So that's close enough on the inside. I've allowed myself a little bit of wood to take away on the outside of that. So that, I'll just check that, the old finger in there, and just check the shape for any bumps and ridges that feel wrong, and that feels reasonable. So I'm happy to go with that. So I'm just going to move my rest well out of the way and sand the inside there. I'll probably speed the sanding process up because I know that's not yet the most exciting thing to watch. I've got my extractor hood there. I'll turn on my extractor, which is going to be the noisy bit. And then for sanding on that, I've got here just a little block of wood with some saw cuts in it, just to hold on my sheets of abrasive. I use the 2-inch abrasive rather than anything coarser, or anything wider. I find 2-inch abrasive, it's a good size to hold in my hand and quite convenient. So 2 inches in there is absolutely fine. When you're working in a hole like this, never wrap the abrasive around your finger. I just hold it between thumb and 2 forefingers like that, so I can put a bit of pressure on it in the hole, but I'm not going to wrap it around my fingers, because if that gets caught on anything, I don't want to be attached to it. So in the hole, I drop the speed down a bit. I'm running about 900 RPM here. The reason I'm dropping the speed, I don't want to create too much heat. Heat is bad news both for the wood and for the abrasives. I think if you run the lathe too fast, the abrasive doesn't cut properly. So bring the speed down a bit. I'd say go for about 2/3 of whatever speed you were turning at. Now obviously with a variable speed lathe, that's very quick and easy to do. I'm starting off here with 150 grit. Hopefully that will get rid of any tool marks, form grain, any other damage or anything else I'm trying to remove. If it doesn't, there's no point in me going finer. And if that doesn't work, I'm just going to get a fresh piece. If that doesn't work, then I'll go down. I mean, as I said, I started at 150. If I'm not getting the results I want with 150, I'll go down to 120. And if that doesn't work, go down to 80 grit. If that doesn't work, I'll pick up a brick or something. Rather than blowing dust away, I'll use a brush. Just brush it out of the hole. I've got a circular slash brush there, so no corners and edges. It's great. I'll just leave it by the lathe and use that for blowing dust away, rather than me blowing it away. Because if you've got your face close enough to blow the dust out, you've got your face close enough to blow it back in your face. And under normal circumstances, I would be wearing dust protection, but because I know that's going to muffle my voice, I'm not at the moment. So I've got the extractor going, and I've got overhead filters that I can also use to keep the dust down. So for this purposes of this, I'm not wearing a dust mask, but yes, under normal circumstances, that is definitely what you should do. Inside there feels okay. Down the end of it again at 150, and then down through the grit. After that one, I've got 180. Same process again, in there, and I'm sanding across the bottom and up the side. If the first grit's done its job properly, all I need to do here is to remove the scratch marks that the 150 grit left. So it shouldn't take too long. And then if that's done its job, same applies to the 240. 240 grit is the next step from 180 for me. I think the experts say don't go more than 50% up on the numbers. So if you've gone from 180, 50% up from there is 270. So your next grit should be less than 270. My next one up happens to be 240. So that's where I go. On the end there, 320. And on this particular project, that's probably far enough. I've got a light coloured wood, fairly easy to cut and turn, so I don't think I need to sand beyond 320. I have got finer grits if I want, but to be honest, I don't think I need them. I can go to 400, 600 or beyond, but with this, 320 is plenty. I'm just going to turn that dust extractor off. So I can hear myself. Hopefully you can hear me too. So that's the inside sanded. I'm also going to put the finish on it now. If it was a decorative goblet, it would probably just be sand and sealer and wax. For this one, if I'm going to do it as a functional one, then I can either put cellulose sand and sealer on it followed by melamine, or if I'm using the Rustins finish, I'll paint that straight on with no sealer, or in this case I'm using a melamine lacquer. I'm just putting some neat on a cloth and working it in, and this is just really acting as a substitute for the sanding sealer. And in this form, it dries really quick, as does the cellulose sanding sealer. So put enough of that on to seal the end, seal the grain in there inside the goblet. That's enough. So that's my first coat of finish, effectively, and just treating it as a sealer. So that's going to dry in probably seconds. That's already dry. So at that stage, I would cut it back. I've got a lump here of 4/0 grade wire wool. Again, don't wrap it around your fingers. And cut the finish back with that. I wouldn't use this on any open grain woods, such as oak, ash, elm, chestnut, etc. The little particles of the iron in the wire wool get caught in the pores in the wood, and over time that can react with the tannins and acids in the wood and discolour it. So I wouldn't use it on any of those open grain wood. The sycamore, I think we're safe. So that's the inside of the cup. Hopefully you can see there, it's got a bit of a shine on it now. So we can move on to the outside. So I'm just setting up my rest at the suitable height for using with a spindle gouge. So what I'm going to do now is start to work on the outer dimensions of the goblet. First thing I need to do is figure out exactly where the bottom of the hole is. So I'm using my trusty paintbrush as a depth guide here, marking across the end so I know there is where the bottom of my hole is. I'll probably come back and refer back to that a number of times, but if I was being more efficient and doing this properly, I can use one of these depth gauges and actually do the same with that and mark it out to the depth of the hole. So instead of having to keep referring back to the hole, I can just put it there and check the depth of my cup. Same rule applies as to doing the bowls. You've got to make the outside of the cup bigger than the inside. Otherwise you end up with a very short cup. Right, so that's my point where I'm going to start. I mean, if you can't see just that mark, you can always make a line like that and make it more obvious. Obviously, the first thing I'm going to do is to turn that line away. But at least I know where my start point is. So I'm making myself a bit of space here. Setting in with my spindle gauge. Flute at about 45 degrees. And just start with that gentle shape. From the top, it's pretty much square. Working down the outside of the cup and start to make that progressive curve. It's a very similar curve to the one I showed you as the example. So I'm aiming for something similar to that. Okay. So I'll start the cut at the top, all the way down the goblet. Keep that cut there. Remove a little bit more wood here. Give me more space. You see, every time I do that, the actual bottom point moves to the left. So I've got to bear in mind that I'm moving the bottom of the cup unless I'm careful. So I want to maintain my finished position by shortening the cup slightly. So at this stage I'm roughly shaping it. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect at this point because obviously I've got more wood to take away to refine my shape. So I'm not overly concerned with finding the shape. That's getting closer to where it wants to be. I can put my fingers in there and just give me a rough guide of thickness of the cut. And at the moment it is quite thick. So I can take more wood away. I think my rest is slightly low, so I'll just tweaking that. I know all the experts say don't move your rest with the lathe running, but in that instance I was just bringing it up by a couple of millimeters. So I'll just do it carefully there. If you're unsure about that, turn the lathe off first. I'll just check with my depth gauge. That's getting close to where it wants to be. And again, still a little bit of wood to take away on the earth, so up to the top. And again, I need to just remove a little bit more wood beneath that. As I said earlier, I'm trying to maintain as much contact or as much wood at the base of this as possible for as long as possible, because that's my support for the cuts I'm doing up here. So I don't want to go ridiculously thin at the bottom because I'll start to lose support and the goblet will start to flex. And here, there, it's already starting to reach that point. So if I just change my cut slightly, it's also getting to the point where it's a little bit thinner. So I'll just change my cut slightly and just check that. Depth-wise, I'll turn the light up there. We've got about 6 millimeters, 7 millimeters at the bottom of the cup. Thickness wise, I'm happy with that. That's not too bad. So I can just release that bottom of the stem a little more. So I'll just remove a bit of that surplus wood, and I'm just shaping the bottom of the cut as far as I can at this stage, while still keeping enough support to sand that. I don't want to get to the point where I can't even sand it. So I think I've taken away enough there. I've left about a ½ inch or so figure at the base of the cut. That's enough support for what I need to do next. So just double check that. That's about, yeah, eight or so millimeters at the bottom, which is ample. You can go thinner, but I always leave just a little bit more at the base for strength, really. In fact, I'm just going to reshape the bottom of that. I'm not quite happy with the curve at the base. I'm just going to take a little bit more away at the bottom. That's better. I prefer that one. Okay, so sanding again. Move the rest out of the way. Dust hood where it needs to be to catch the dust. And put my extractor back on. So hopefully with that, I can start probably on 180. I think that's slightly better than the inside of the cut with the cut. You'd like to see what I'm doing, it should be. So 180 grit, any little bumps and ridges on the outside of the cut, I should be able to remove with 180 grit. So I'll sand right down to the base as far as I can. Bear in mind the direction of rotation. So I'm holding the abrasive where it's going down and away from me. So at the front or at the bottom is where I'm sanding. I don't sand at the top there where the wood's coming towards me. So if the abrasive gets caught, it'll be pulled down and away. I won't get my fingers bent back because I've got my fingers going with the direction of rotation. So just stop that and have a look. That's looking pretty clean. So I can move on to 240 grit. If it didn't look good, then I'd consider whether I should go back down to 150, 120 or whatever it needed. That's enough for that one. Then on to 320.
Sorry, Paul, do you ever reverse?
All the way into the bottom.
So, Paul, do you ever reverse the direction of rotation?
Good. So back to my melamine lacquer. I'll put some of that on a bit of kitchen tissue. Rub it into the grain. And a bit more. This dries pretty quick, so you've got to get it on as fast as you can, really. But that's enough to give me my seal as my first coat. And I can build that up with more coats to get more shine. So I'll just burnish that with the tissue I used to put it on. And then on my steel wool, there it is. Just cut that back with a steel wool. And that's the cut. ready for the next stage. So there's the goblet, cup done. Now we've got to work on the stem. As I said before, I want the stem to be, let's say, 4 fingers wide, because that's comfortable sort of grip. So I'm aiming for about here for the base of the stem. So I've got a little bit of leeway at the bottom of my cup. So I'm positioning my rest so it's covering the whole length of the stem. I can speed my lathe up again now. Let's start cutting some of this waste wood away. I'll just carry on with my 1/2-inch spindle guide. So I'm going to work on the stem in sections. If I turn all my stem down to the diameter, the finished diameter, I might run into problems. So I'm turning it down bit by bit. So that's at the top there, that's as thin as I want to go. Stop the lathe there a sec. What the experts say is you should have some sort of feature to as a transition between different elements. So instead of just flowing the stem into the cup or vice versa, here I want some sort of demarcation between the two. You could do some sort of little decorative feature there. One of my favourites, because it's fairly simple and effective, is just to do a V-cut right on that joint. So I'm just going to use my skew chisel here. I've got it's about 1 inch skew. So I'm going to go in at the point there and just do a simple V-cut. Okay, so there's my V-cut. I can see already this cut started to flex slightly, and it's oscillating ever so slightly. So I suspect as I continue to work the stem, I mean, with this ripple figuring in the wood, that's really an indication that you've got stresses in the wood. So I'm not surprised that I'm getting a little bit of movement in this as it's turned. This is bone dry. It's been in my workshop for a couple of years probably. So I know it's dry, and it was supposedly dry when I bought it. It was a prepared blank that I bought, or prepared length of spindle. So I know it's pretty much dry, so it's not moisture loss, but there are stresses in the wood that you're going to release at the point where you cut, so that might bend one way or another. So to mitigate that, I'll show you what I do. I'm going to put my tailstock back. And then what I want is some way of holding that goblet cup without damaging it, marking it, or getting in my way. Where I started with this was to use something like that, just an ordinary solid rubber ball. Put it in the cup, you get a ball the same size as the cup. This is obviously a bit small for this one, but that's what I used to use. But for many years now, I've been using these polystyrene balls, getting in various sizes. You can see there we've got 3 different sizes. I've got a big one, medium size, and small one. You can buy them from places like Hobbycraft. They sell them for making baubles and various things like that. So what I want is the biggest of those that will fit into my cup. So that one isn't a bad fit. I'll go with that one. I could probably go down one size, but that's it. That's good enough. And then I need something to support the ball. So I need a centre of some description. I could use a point centre or a ring centre, but what I've got here, let me get my more paper adapter attached there. What I've got here is a live centre with a cup on it. So a cup centre. This is the Axminster multi-tip centre. It comes with 2 or 3 centres, and there's 2 or 3 others you buy as accessories. So, and this is one of them. So I'll put that in my tailstock, put the ball in the hole, bring the tailstock in, lock that down, and just enough pressure to hold that there. I don't want a great deal, but just enough to hold it there. I don't want to put a lot of force because I'll start bowing the stem. So just enough to keep it where it is. Okay, so now that's given me a little bit more support and a little bit more security at the tailstock end, and hopefully that will keep it where I want it. So that looks to be running through, so I'll carry on with that. I've cut my V. I'm just going to taper the stem down a bit on the other side of the V. I'm not going for ultra thin because I want to do that twist stem. So I'm leaving that thick enough to allow me to cut my twist. And what I said about fingers would be in the length, so that's about where I want the foot. You see here I'm working nearly 2 inches away from the rest with the tip of the tool, so I'm overhanging, so I'm taking light cuts so I've got control. Next thing I've got to think about is how big is my foot. Well, not me personally, but the goblet. Here, this is, as I said, is going to be a functional goblet. So I want the size of the foot to be roughly the size of the opening in the cup. So I can set a pair of dividers to my cup size, calipers. So that's about the size of my foot, give or take. Yeah. So I can turn this section down until I've reached that point. Check that, nearly there. Right, so that's got my foot size. It's not a precision thing. Give or take a few millimeters and we're in the right ballpark. So the next thing I need to do is to shape the remainder of the foot. I quite like an OG shape, so I'm going in quite steep at the start of the cut, then out, and then roll it back again. So there's my OG foot. Okay, or at least the starting of it. I need to turn down the remainder of the stem again to make that feature at the base, so I'm probably close to the diameter I need right there. And again, a V-cut with my skew. So I'm using the long point of the skew, doing that, and then coming from the other side as well. I'm doing 2 or 3 light cuts rather than one big one. Right, so there's my V-cut at the bottom, and then I can just finish off the rest of this stem. Just turn that and blend it into the remainder of the stem. Okay, so I've got a pretty much parallel stem there. I'll just do a light finishing cut across the top of the foot into there, and just clean that up right into the V with my skew. So that's ready for me to sand now. I've got the foot and the stem to sand. One thing I will do at this point, where I've got this solid block here, is just to do a parting cut so I know where the bottom of the foot's going to be. So let's make it right there. I'm not going to part it all the way up, I'm just making that release cut so I know where I've got to finish my sanding. Again, as a functional thing, I want that thick enough so it's got the strength to support the cup full of liquid. And if someone puts it down heavily, I don't want chunks of that to fall off. Remember, that's short sections of side grain, end grain, really. So the strength is not through the through the foot because of the grain direction. So you need to leave enough thickness to allow for that. So that's the cutting part then. Let's move that out of the way, and I just need to sand this part. So again, probably start at about 180 grit. Let me just turn my extractor on, forgot. Got the speed down just a little. I'm right in there. And my stem. Get that right into the recess of that V. And also sand the edge of my foot there. So we'll just stop the lathe there and just check that looks okay. I think that's it. Just do it one last. There. Then I'll switch down to 240. Get right into the cup. And the final sand at 320. I'm cutting most of that stem away, but I still sand it just in case parts of it aren't cut away. In this instance, I think pretty much all of it will be, but so I'll probably sand in bits I don't need to by sanding the stem, but just in case I change my mind, I suppose. Right, so that's sanded to my final grit, which was 320. Okay, so I'll keep my tool rest well out of the way. I'll leave my support where it is for the cup, because that will come in useful at this stage. So I'm just putting my tool rest at the tailstock out of the way. What I want to do is work on the stem. I'm going to put a twist stem on this. Just grab my tools. On that one. And that one. Right, so to cut that twist stem, what I've got here is just a bunch of round files. Nothing more complicated than that. Start off with this one. This is a 6-inch, just ordinary engineer's file, 6-inch round file, rat tail as they call it. It's got a slight taper on the end of it. You can use chainsaw files, but they are the same diameter all the way through, and they don't come in different grades. They've just got one grade, as far as I'm aware, for sharpening chainsaws, and that's fine. That's what they're intended for, and it does that job adequately. Here, we're trying to do something else. I'm just moving my little keyboard. So I'll start off with a small file, then I'll move up to a rough cut, bigger file, bastard cut as it's called, and then onto a second cut file. So I'm starting off thin groove, then widen it, and then refine it with a finer file. To do this, I want the lathe switched off, so I'm not using any power on it at all. Hold my file at, I don't know, 45 degrees, give or take. That's one thing I like about this shape of foot. It gives me the perfect sort of relief to get the file where I want it to start. And then I just start to file, start to cut. And you see already I made a little groove there. So now what I want to do is continue that. And as I do, slowly rotate the chuck by hand. I'm leaning over the headstock here and just keep going. Initially, I'm not worried about going too deep. I just want to make that groove and keep my file at the same angle as I rotate, so it keeps the pitch of the spiral consistent. Well, that's the plan. So you can see there, I've done a full revolution. That's the start. That's where it's coming back round again. So I think by the time I get to the top of the stem, I will probably have another revolution. If I make these in pairs, I do one with a clockwise twist and one with an anti-clockwise twist. So when you put the two side by side, they're mirror images rather than twins. You see what I mean? So I think that just looks better when you see two of them together. If you think your spiral's drifting off at any point, you can just steer it as you go. Remember, we're going to widen this groove, so if we need to steer it a bit, doesn't matter. You'll lose that when you widen the groove. So there we've got relatively consistent width. I think I just need to pull that back a little. That's not too bad there. So that's my first spiral, first cut. This is meant to be a handmade thing. It's not a piece of precision engineering in that respect. So if that spiral isn't 100% perfect, then in my view, that's just part of the character of it. So I've got a single twist there, single spiral started. I want a two-start twist. So what I need to do now is pick a point between the start point and where it comes back round again, just there. So I've halved that distance, and I'll start my second cut there. And now as I'm cutting, I'm looking at the grooves each side of it and centering on it. That was getting quite hot. And when I get to the top, I'm just cautious not to damage the finish on the cut there. So I'm getting close to it, but I am watching where I'm going. So go back to the bottom. Pretty obvious where it is because it starts farther up. And then I'll just work backwards until I get to the bottom. Right, so that's my two twists started. So it looks a bit rough and ready at the moment, but at this stage, that's fine. So I'll pick one of those two grooves and make it deeper. So I'll just file it deeper. There are various different twists you can do. More than two starts, you can have as many as you like, but two's enough for this, I think. You can do more if you so wish. You can do, here what I'm doing is what I call a barley twist, but there are others. Let me find another one. So you can see that first example I showed you. That's what I call a barley twist. It's very rounded on the top. So the curve at the top is very similar to the curve at the bottom of the trough. This one, which is it's been kicking around in my workshop for quite a long time, the foot split on it, so I was going to make another foot for it, but I haven't got around to it yet. But you can see it's a narrower top. That's what I call a ribbon twist. Both are done using the same tools, but it's just variation on the depth of the groove and the peak at the top. This one, you just make the groove wider and deeper and just lightly round over the peak. Whereas this one, you shape it more to make it more symmetrical top and bottom. Okay, so on with this deepening of the grooves. Take a few cuts, get as deep as I want, but remember, as I'm doing this, I'm losing thickness off the stem and losing strength off the stem. So don't be too aggressive with it. Take account of the weakening of the stem as you're cutting wood away. At this stage, I can be quite forceful and aggressive with it and not worry too much, but once I get wider and deeper, there's less wood to support the stem, so I need to be a little bit more careful at that point. Right, that's looking better. I'll just do it again. See where we're at. When you're doing this, part of the cut you're doing is with the grain, and on the other side of the cut, you're cutting against the grain. So you will get small patches of potentially damaged grain. So picking a wood that's very soft probably isn't going to do you any favours. A harder wood is sometimes better with these. That's why I think the fruit woods are quite good. They're hard enough to get a reasonably nice cut and not too hard to make it too difficult. Right, so I think I've got to as deep as I need with that smallest file. So I'll ditch the 6-inch file. I'll switch now to my 8-inch file and cut from the bottom of the groove just to widen it. So I'm going wider and deeper. And as I'm doing this, again, if I think I need to, I can just tweak the direction slightly to even up the gaps between the two spirals. That's that one, and we switch to the other one. If you're unsure which is which, you can always put a pencil mark at the bottom of one of them, then you know which one you've done and which one you haven't. I just follow them up and down to see. I mean, there I'm just pulling that to the right because I think I've got narrower slot one side than the other. So I'm just pulling it to compensate. And I want to go roughly to half the diameter of the file in depth here. And I would say this file is probably 5 millimeters or so diameter. So I'm going to a depth of about 3 millimeters, give or take. Right. So if I've got a 3 millimeter cut each side of that stem and it's 10 millimeters, that leaves me 3 or 4 millimeters in the middle. So that's why I'm saying just be careful of putting too much pressure on it. It might break. Okay, so that's cut it deeper. I mean, at this point, I've got the choice of going for the ribbon twist or the barley twist, so I can shape it either way. I'll go for the barley twist, and the way I do that, once I've cut the grooves to the depth I want, instead of following that groove with the file, I'll turn the file so I'm going across the corners. So all I'm doing here is knocking those corners off. Now let's start on the next one, do the same. I think I've got the same one again there, but that's fine. Look at the other one. So we've got that age old scenario now. You start off with a square, you knock the corners off, and you've got an octagon, then you knock those corners off, and so on, and you end up with a smooth curve. So that's what I'm aiming for. Take the corners off, and then the corners that creates, take them off, and so on. So you end up with curves. So now I'm going to go halfway between my angle there and my start position, which is going to be about there. So just taking the corners off the bottom of the bits I've just created. And then back to the bottom on that one, pick up the other one. And that's that one. And then I'll go even farther across and take off the sort of the extreme peaks. At this point, you don't have to be perfect or precise with it. That's not too bad, it's a good start. I'll switch to the smoother file and just repeat that whole process. I'll go down the bottom of the groove to start with, just to shape it. Back to the bottom on that one, pick up the other one, shape that all the way up the stem. And now do my cuts across to shape the tops of the curve. Okay, so that's roughly shaped it with a file. So I can put the files away now and move on to the next stage. One other tool worth mentioning here is this. It's a microplane made by a company called Carroll. Any relation to yours, Pat? No. But they're a foil with lots of little teeth on, and they're very sharp and they're very good, and you can use it for shaping this. I'm not going to use it on this because it's a wider curve, but if I was doing that ribbon twist, I'd probably switch to this to cut the wider grooves, and they're really good. They're a bit longer than this, but as it's a foil, and me being a bit heavy-handed with it once, I snapped it right where it joins the handle, but I managed to pull the stub out and put the remaining blade in the handle, so I've just got a slightly shorter version, which actually benefits me because it also makes it a bit stiffer. So just let me grab something out of my toolbox for the next part.
Done the exact same with my microplane, Paul.
Right?
Done the exact same with my microplane.
Yeah, it happens. But fortunately, it's. I think I learned my lesson with that one, so I haven't broken it again since. I'm just rummaging through my toolbox here, trying to find a bit of small piece of dowel.
Not entirely sure whether all of us have got a short microplane on the thing, but I've got one as well.
Yeah. Right, found one. Right, so next stage is it's just a bit of dowel. This is about, I don't know, 5mm dowel. But you just tailor the dowel to the size of your curve. And if you can't find it in the shop, you can always go and see if you can find a decent turner to make some for you. Right, so I'm just wrapping what I've got here is 150 grit. Wrapping that around the dowel, and then using that in the place of the file. So I'm refining my surface, refining my shape. So I'll go up and down, changing the angle. So I'm sanding all parts of that curve. And when I'm happy with the first one, I'll switch to the other one, do exactly the same. Just keep going up and down. Change my angles. I would spend a little bit longer than this on it, but I'm just trying to show you the actual process here rather than the perfect result. So bear with me if it doesn't quite look perfect, but I think it's one of those things where I say do as I say, not as I do. So I'm getting the shape, and you can see that starting to look softer and more rounded now. I'm losing the corners, I'm losing the wispy bits, and any bits where I might have damaged grain from where it's cutting against the grain. So bit by bit, it's coming together. So yeah, that's reasonable off the tool there. So what I want to do now is to continue with that. And if I run the lathe slowly, by slowly I mean 400-500 RPM. I think there I'm just under 500 RPM, 450-ish. And at that speed, it's a bit like thread chasing. You can follow a groove. So I'm using my abrasive again, right around that bit of dowel, and I'm just following the grooves that I've cut with the abrasive, and using the lathe to help me to sand this. Don't get in too regular a rhythm, because you might just be sanding one groove. Stop every now and again, or just change the time you wait between them, and law of averages says do it enough times and you're bound to get them both. Look at that. That's not looking too bad. A little bit more with 150. Remember, I've sanded all the rest of this already down to 320, so all I've got to sand here is the actual twist, the stem part, the foot stem, the cup stem, to sand this to my right. So that's 150. Same again with 180. I could probably go slightly faster with this, but not a lot. It gets a bit frantic if you go much above that. 500 RPM is about where you want to be, I think. Yeah, I mean, potentially 600-700 RPM is doable, but I don't like having to chase myself on this. So 500 is a comfortable pace for me. 440 to 500 is a comfortable sort of speed. When you get in the grooves there, you can fold the abrasive and just use it without the stick. Hand across the top, hand it back and forth. And use that in the grooves without the stick. Again, bending it in different angles, different positions, pushing it forward, bending it backwards, to try and get in all the parts of that need sanding. That looks reasonable. So we switch down to 240, do the same again. And then take the stick out, sand it again. You can actually do this whole process with a piece of dowel and abrasives. I remember once I went to do a club demo and I made the goblet and then realised I'd left my files at home. So I did the twist entirely with a bit of dowel and some abrasives. It's not ideal, but it is doable. So you can improvise if you don't want to go out and buy some files. But having said that, they're not expensive, £2 or £3 each. But if you buy files without handles, put some handles on them before you use them, because the tangs can be very sharp, and you don't want to stick the tang into your hand. So make sure you put handles on them. You know, I mean, some of them come with plastic handles and some with wooden ones, but I'm sure it's not beyond the wit of a wood turner to make their own anyway. Right, so last one, 320 grit. remove the stick and do it again. Get underneath that. Right, so sanding done, I'm just going to brush the dust away that resulted from that. Have a quick look. That doesn't look too bad. So I can go back to my cloth and melamine and coat the rest of it. A little bit on the pad. I've got to just do the bottom of that cut because I made that last little cut after I'd coated the rest of the cut, remember. I'll just make sure I get all of it. Do all of the stem. Work it into the twists. And then the foot to the edge. Okay, just let that dry for a minute. And as I said before, you can always speed that up. Now, one more thing that I do with these usually, let's bring my rest in here. I should have done this before I put the melamine on, but I'll show you anyway. Rather than leave the edge of that foot square as it is, I'll just do a little half a cove. Let me speed up again. So coming right on the corner here, and just do a half a cove on the corner. And it just lightens the edge, and it makes it look like you thought about it. That's it. I always leave that till I've finished sanding, because if you sand the edge, you'll probably lose the detail, the crispness of it. So with a very delicate cut, I can hopefully get that sharp enough. So I'm just going to touch it with a 320 grit. And then a spot of my melamine on there. There's the sealer. I normally do that before I put the finish on, but I forgot. Okay, so that's finished done, or at least the base coat of the finish done. As I said, that now needs multiple coats, probably 7 or 8, sometimes more. I mean, it depends on the wood. Sometimes because I'm working on cutting that back, I might end up putting more than 7 or 8 coats, because sometimes certainly with the early layers, you're cutting back more than or a large amount of what you put on. So I can remove my cup now. So that's the goblet. I'm not going to part it off now. I'll leave it on the base. I'll leave that on the base because as I apply layers of finish, I like to be able to cut that back with wire wool between coats. So I want to leave it on the base so I can put it back in, cut it back, and then put another layer of finish on it. So only when I've completely finished putting the finish on do I part it off, and then I will do the same process on the base again. Probably, I don't know, about 8 layers of finish on the base, which being end grain sucks it up quite a bit initially, but that's the whole process, start to finish.